to Middlesex Moments, coming to you from the Center for New Media at the main campus of Middlesex Community College here in Middletown. I'm Steve Minkler, the college CEO, and I'm surrounded by students in the college's studio television production course. You can't see them because they're running all the equipment and the cameras that make Middlesex Moments work, so thanks everybody for being here and doing this. Don't worry, they are being safe, they're wearing face masks, and they are staying socially distant from each other during this production. I'm very happy to report that the college reopened this summer after closing for about 4 months due to the COVID pandemic. Students and faculty returned to campus on August 26th for their fall semester courses. We've made a lot of important changes on campus and in our class schedule. Until now, Middlesex Community College has been a traditional campus, traditional college with in-person classes. And we've had a few online options along the way. But now, for the 2020-21 school year, we've become an online college with a few on-campus options for our students. We'll still have traditional face-to-face classes on our campus, but a lot fewer of them. Examples are things like television production, fine arts, sciences, and other programs that require specialized labs and studios. We'll also have general studies courses for students who really do need that face-to-face interaction with their professors. Class sizes will be much smaller, and our seats will be about 6 feet apart so we can maintain social distancing. All students, employees, and visitors must show photo ID at the door, must wear a face mask, and must maintain that social distancing to protect the health and safety of everybody on campus. So, in terms of looking around, Middlesex Moments reporter Joseph Nieves looked on campus to see how things have changed for this semester.
With fears of a second wave of coronavirus affecting our nation, many schools open amidst the chaos. We check out Middlesex Community College to see how they're handling their reopening plan.
So we've done a lot on campus to get ready for the coronavirus. Obviously changed all the classrooms around to make our way for social distancing. We are sanitizing the campus much more frequently. There's markers on seats indicating not to sit here. Everybody has to wear a mask. We are enforcing that. So we're doing our best just to kind of keep the campus open, yet in a way that's safe for everyone.
Generally, I try to distance myself if I do see large groups of people on campus. I also put my faith into students coming on campus. If they obviously have something wrong with them, they should take responsibility and stay home.
Online classes have also been a big change for students as they come back for the fall semester.
Now my classes are now like hybrid and online, so I have to come here, sometimes do it at home, so it's going back and forth. So it's kind of difficult, but it's kind of a new experience. I'm trying to adapt with it.
Most of it has been turned over to a more online perspective, and that's why I've been taking more on-campus classes, because I still want the ideal college experience.
I like coming out to the campus and I like interacting with the people here, but again, I understand it's the only way to do this safely.
You can't really replace the on-ground experience. That's why we have our campus open the best that we can to make sure students can have that live experience that they want. I'm thankful every day that I don't have a residential campus. That residential portion is where we're seeing a lot of the spikes. I think it's because the students aren't doing what they were asked to do. If we're in it together and we do what we're supposed to do, we will lessen the opportunity for COVID to take over.
Generally, people like to space themselves out and follow the rules here, which I really appreciate.
Keep doing what we're doing because I believe we're flattening the curve.
That's the best thing that we can do for one another.
Remember to stay safe and stay healthy. This is Joseph Nieves reporting for Middlesex Moments.
Thanks, Joseph. The college is constantly monitoring the public health situation in our city, our region, and our state. We work closely with the central office of the Connecticut State Colleges and Universities System, the local departments of public health, and the governor's office to ensure that we are providing an environment that protects the health and safety of our entire college community. Thank you in advance for wearing a face mask and observing social distance, whether you're on campus or out in the public. The college prides itself on the variety of public events that we do host on campus. We'll be pretty limited in what we can offer this fall and probably in the spring due to the COVID pandemic. But let's take a look back at last spring's annual poetry reading. Middlesex Moments reporter Jake Torello filed this report.
There's something called the Connecticut Poetry Circuit, and it's a contest for students across our state and all colleges and universities in our state, both private and public. A faculty member can nominate one student to the circuit, and then the student who is nominated submits a packet of poetry, and a panel of judges reads the packets and submissions and then selects 5 students to go on tour reading their poetry at the universities and colleges that book them. So they actually get paid a little stipend for going on what they call the circuit.
During catfish, sleeping at my beach house.
And today we hosted 2 of the circuit winners here at Middlesex, and we made it into a larger event by including Middlesex Community College readers from a creative writing class.
You could say I started reading back in kindergarten and writing back in kindergarten too. But when I really started to write and when I really actually started to read, I want to say I was at least 13, maybe 14 at the time.
Why I can't survive and contrive my very will to live and survive a life cleared from sins, finally to feel like I can win.
I think the goal was to build community and leadership and confidence in our students, and to just show them how poetry really connects us all.
Thanks, Jake. Well, it's time for a short break. When we come back, I'll be joined by my guest, author and historian, Professor Dr. Victor Triay. You're watching Middlesex Moments from Middlesex Community College.
I was homeschooled, and after doing a lot of research, I found MXCC, and it looked like a really good fit for me because I wanted to transfer to UConn, and they have the Pathways program. Being homeschooled, it was nice to have smaller classes. The professors really helped me understand the material. I really felt that Middlesex was invested in my education. It's one of the greatest experiences I've had.
Welcome back to Middlesex Moments from Middlesex Community College. I'm Steve Minkler, the college CEO, and joining me today is my guest who's a frequent guest on our program, author and historian, Professor Dr. Victor Triay.
Hello, Steve. Nice to be here again.
Always glad to have you.
Thank you.
So Victor, you know, we're now in this COVID era. Mm-hmm. How has teaching changed for you now that we're back for the fall semester?
Well, it's still kind of new, and I just completed my first full week. Last week, we started on a Wednesday, so I actually saw each class once. Had the syllabus day and the explanation day and whatnot, but this was the first full week of teaching. And you know what? It was, on the one hand, it was challenging, but on the other, it was great. I mean, it was, when I got out of that first Wednesday class, which it was a night class, so it was half syllabus night and half teaching. It was difficult teaching with the mask, mm-hmm. Okay, just breathing, because I lecture, right? And that's what I do. That's what I've always done. But it was almost, so part of me felt tired, like I was about to pass out. But the other part of me felt almost cleansed. I think that's the first time I taught in a classroom since March 5th, because the week of March 9th, if you remember, I got sick. I didn't have COVID, but it was still that era when if you're slightly sick, don't come within 10 miles of campus. And I didn't. And so it was wonderful. It was great. And then this week was great. And it was different and it was difficult, but it felt really good because I really, and in complete honesty, and I tell my students all the time, I really love teaching. I love being in the classroom. For years I've told my students, I'm standing at the podium and I said, and I tell them, I said, you guys know something? The happiest moment of my week, or moments, is when I step up to this podium and I'm about to start class. And that's the truth. Mm-hmm. And I miss that a lot. And you just, it's not the same online. Online has its benefits, but that thrill that Victor Triay gets, it just doesn't happen. And I've been teaching in the same, I don't think on campus I've ever taught outside of Snow Hall.
Okay.
I taught a couple courses in Meriden, and that's about it. And since, I think it was like 1997, or maybe it was 98, I've only taught in the classroom that I'm currently in, because I have the maps bolted on the wall, and it's right across from my office. And mm-hmm. after all those years, before most of my kids were even born, I've been teaching in that room. And so it was kind of strange, because now they got a piece of Chapman, blocked off for me.
Well, it's normally a big open multi-purpose room, right?
Right,
Yeah.
And so it's huge.
Yeah.
And the student, it's 2 or 3 times the size of my classroom with the same number of students, and some of them, most of them really, are very far away from me, and I really noticed my aging at that point because my glasses, like I told you earlier, I need them for distance, but I can't read with them. And I'm usually reading my notes on the computer, so I usually don't have them. Usually the students are close enough where I can still see them without the glasses. Now, I can't see them. I realize, oh my goodness. And then my hearing isn't what it was when I was 26. And I have a little trouble in the classroom, my normal classroom, but now they're so far, they're wearing masks, and you have this high ceiling, right? So, I'm really feeling my age a little bit there. But other than that, it's been great and wonderful. And I don't have my maps, but I do have a huge screen where I can get the internet and put on the side television. I'm not the most technically savvy person there is. So, but I was taught, Mike Kavanaugh came up, and then I couldn't reach the map because the screen is so high. And then he gave me a little pointer with a little red dot, and again, to me, that's like high tech. Right. But it's been great. It's been great. I miss my colleagues. I miss getting to campus and walking through a gauntlet of students and colleagues. I'm parking in a lower lot for the first time because all my courses are in Chapman. I don't talk to anyone but the guard on the way in. I go in, and then I go right back out into the parking lot. So it's different, but I'm very, very, very happy to be teaching again.
Well, it sounds it. I mean, I've seen you in the classroom, just as a colleague, just to see how you do your thing. And your thing really is being a very emotive, very detailed storyteller.
Yeah.
And that work kind of also translates into a lot of the writing you do. So. Right. We're here to talk actually about your latest release, but before we get to that, you've written both fiction and nonfiction,
correct,
principally talking about the Cuban-American experience. And what drew you initially to writing about this this particular experience among many of our friends and our neighbors?
Well, I grew up in the Cuban exile community. My family was among the first wave of exiles that left Cuba in the early 1960s. They left in 1960. And I was born and raised in the community. I won't say that my family was overly politically active, although, politics and wanting a free Cuba was always, a part of the community. But it was always around me. I won't say I was any sort of an activist, but, late college, I traveled quite a bit. I'd studied overseas quite a bit. I saw, suddenly for a lot of people for the first time in my life, and then when I went to UF, University of Florida, and then FSU, I kind of became, the only Cuban a lot of people knew. And so the Cuba issue. And then my wife was born in Cuba and raised there. And when I went away to graduate school, my major field of study was 20th century Italy. The first half of the 20th century, mostly the Mussolini era, because I'd studied in Italy and I spoke some Italian. But then looking at the Cuba thing from a distance, and through the eyes of a historian, which is what I was being trained to be, I realized, wow, what a story. Because when you're brought up around it, it's just the furniture. Yeah, I know people were in the CIA, doesn't everybody? Or that were in the Bay of Pigs invasion, or that, went through an exile experience. And I started realizing how interesting it was to people, and how interesting it was to me. It already was interesting to me by that point, but I never thought that I would link that with my career as a historian. And then it started, I needed, a series of things happened with professors at Florida State, and I ended up switching to U.S. history as my minor, and still Europe was my major. And then I was having trouble finding a thesis topic in Italy, and the professor who taught it had left, and then I walked to my first U.S. history course. I talked to Dr. William Rogers, who was teaching the course, and we had to write a paper based on original research. We had the whole semester to do it. I didn't know what to do. And then I thought of a Miami, Cuban exile topic, and then he tells me, that would be a great master's thesis. And I go, oh my goodness, if I switch to U.S. history, would you chair my committee? He said, sure. And then I wrote, it was a religious topic, but I got the master's, and then after that, it was, 3 choices. I was getting married, and it was either officer candidate school for the Army, right, which I took all the tests and all I had to do was sign, or law school, or the PhD in history. And then I did the PhD in history, and I was going to write about Al Capone in Florida. But I was already here, right? Or a year later, I was here, and I was having trouble getting the sources. And then my brother, at his house, one day we're in the driveway, and he tells me, why don't you write about Operation Pedro Pan? I'm like, what's that? Most people didn't know what that was at the moment. Even people who were part of the program didn't know about it. They just knew they got put on a plane in Cuba and went to a camp in Miami or whatever. And I started researching it, and I said, this is it. This is it. There's no book about it. No one's written about it. Now there's like 30 books or something. Now it's like everybody knows about Operation Pedro Pan. And I did that, and that was just kind of really my formal entry into all of this. And then to my shock, and I was already teaching here at the time, I rewrote it as a book manuscript and sent it off to be published, not thinking I had a chance. After all, again, still at that point, the Cuba thing was like my neighborhood thing. You know, who would be interested in 14,000 children brought into part of an underground railroad to the United States by the Catholic Church and the State Department and all this? It is interesting, but I still didn't see it that way. And then I realized with the success of that book, it's like, wow, there's a lot more to write about. Right. And so it's been, you know, almost 3 decades doing that.
Right. No, and that led you to also doing research on the Bay of Pigs invasion and the brigade work that you've done with survivors of that invasion.
Right, exactly.
And you've done an oral histories with that.
Well, I wrote a book about the brigade, the invasion force, Brigade 2506 at the Bay of Pigs. And that was published with the 40th anniversary in 2001. That was also published by the University Press of Florida. And then the same one who published the Pedro Pan book. And then Random House published it in Spanish a couple of years later. And that was very lucky because I went to an event in New York for the 40th anniversary of the Bay of Pigs, and somebody came out of the crowd and said, "How would you like to publish this with Random House in Spanish?" I'm like, yeah, let me think about it. And then I wrote the fictional series, right? It was a trilogy, a historical trilogy. And then, which the backdrop was the Bay of Pigs invasion and Operation Pedro Pan. So they're all true to life. I mean, the events that I write about really happened. The only thing that's fictional are the characters. And then the Pedro Pan part, once the kids are sent off to a foster home, then that's obviously complete fiction. And then I also was invited by Florida International University to conduct a large oral history project during the summers of 2016 and 2017. Florida International is a big state school in Miami. And I spent those 2 summers interviewing more than 100 brigade veterans. And then, of course, in 2019, I published a book on the Marielle boat lift, which is which I almost didn't complete, but I stuck it out, and I'm glad I did. It's won 2 awards, and which is nice, and which doesn't happen every day. Right. And so it's been great, and now I'm just kind of in between things.
Sure. Well, and it's a remarkable work of scholarship that spans 60-year history of the Cuban-American experience. You know, some of it, like you said, it pulls from your own family history and kind of just being the wallpaper at first, but then realizing, wow, what an exciting point, and what a story to tell. Yeah. So when we got to take a quick break, Victor, and when we do come back, we're going to learn more about Dr. Victor Triay's latest book, The Marielle Boat Lift: A Cuban-American Journey. You're watching Middlesex Moments from Middlesex Community College.
So the reason I chose the Middlesex Veterinary Technology program was because of all the opportunities it had with Piper Olson Veterinary. There's no other place where you would have access to that. I would definitely recommend Middlesex to anybody who's interested in that career because you're going to be 100% prepared to start your job. That is really empowering.
Welcome back to Middlesex Moments, coming to you from Middlesex Community College. I'm Steve Minkler, the college CEO. And together, joining me today is Dr. Victor Triay, who's an author, historian, and professor of history here at Middlesex Community College. And Victor, before the break, we were talking about the immense scholarship that you, the body of work that you've put together about the Cuban-American experience, starting with your work on the Bay of Pigs through the Brigade 2506. But your most recent book came out last year called The Marielle Boat Lift: A Cuban-American Journey. And this was your way to put in writing the many stories that you've learned from people you know and other interviews you've done about that part of the Cuban-American experience. And what drew you into that?
Well, my last year at the University of Florida, actually it wasn't my last semester, it was a semester I shouldn't have ever done. I needed 4 courses to graduate, and I decided in a 6-week summer semester to take all 4. Including a 3rd-year level biology class.
So would you recommend that to the students here in this class?
No, and I'm terrible at science. And I thought I'd passed, and I moved back home, found out I got an F in the biology course, so I had to move back to UF and to take an earth science class, which was more manageable. And long story short, during that 6-week period, I met my wife, who was a cousin of a friend, and there were very few people from the Miami group there, and so a bunch of us, from different Miami groups kind of got together, and that's where I met her. And one of the first things she told me when we started talking one day, we all went to Crescent Beach, which is near St. Augustine, a couple hours from Gainesville. And we started talking, and by this time I was interested in the Cuba thing. I hadn't seen it as a something ever to write about at the time, but I was interested. And she told me she came on the Marielle boat lift, and I talked to her for like 3 hours. Everybody's at the beach. We're sitting in the apartment, and I'm basically interviewing her. I wasn't even 22 yet. And then, we started going out, and 3 years later, we got married. And so, and I knew very little about Marielle. I lived through Marielle. I was in Miami. That was the first time I saw a lot of things.
And this was what, the late 70s?
No, this is, no, late 80s. Late 80s,
okay,
late 80s.
Sorry.
I'm a few years younger than you, Steve. Right. But, previous to that, when I was 13, I went to Catholic school my whole life. My Catholic grade school went kindergarten through 8th grade. I went kindergarten through 7th. And then for 8th grade, my parents put me in a Jesuit school, which was the same school my father went to in Cuba. When the Jesuits got kicked out of Cuba, they reopened the school in Miami. It was the 7th through 12th grade at the time. And now they got a big, beautiful, sprawling campus, but at the time it was still less than 20 years that they were out of Cuba. And the school was on the east end of Little Havana near downtown Miami. And it was a year I was in that school that Marielle broke out. And I remember, the Marielle boat lift was preceded by the Peruvian embassy crisis. And I had never seen Cuban demonstrations or anything because the Cuban exile activity had been kind of subdued during my years of awareness. Everybody was too busy working, and all of a sudden it exploded. And there was one corner where it was about 3 blocks of hunger strikes and flags. And I remember just saying, oh my goodness, I've never seen anything like this. It stayed with me right through the bus window because a group of us took a public bus because we live very far away from there. Maybe about half an hour from there, 40 minutes, and with traffic even more. And I remember looking at the bus window. I really didn't understand what was going on, but it was just amazing to me. And then I explained it in the book. When you're 13, I wasn't the type of 13-year-old that read the paper and things like that. But I knew there was little bits of it. And then I remember my mom had to pay a carpenter one day, and we had to go to his house to pay him. I remember his name was Vicente. We had like 3 carpenters named Vicente. And then we were in a different neighborhood from where we lived, but not too far from where we lived, but not in the same neighborhood. And my mom's driving, and I'm in the passenger seat, and she tells me in Spanish, she says, wow, look at all the, it's like a Tuesday afternoon or something, and she says, look at all the people getting the boats ready. And sure enough, down the block, all these people getting the boats ready. And me, Mr. On top of the news, right, I said, where are they going? And she looks at me like what's the matter with you? Don't you follow? She says, they're going to Cuba. And I'm like, what? I mean, you have to understand, when I was a kid growing up, nobody was coming from Cuba, right? The freedom flights had ended. I was still very young. The freedom flights were the second wave. My parents had come even before that, in the first wave. I didn't ever have relatives who came from Cuba. Anybody who came from Cuba was there. And Cuba, there was no communication with Cuba during those years. If you had relatives there and you wanted to talk to them, first of all, you might get them in trouble just by talking to them, because those were like the North Korea years in Cuba. And like my grandmother had a sister. She had to sit by the phone for 3 days to wait for an operator to call her back to put her through, and state security would listen. If you sent a letter to someone in Cuba, they would open it and then glue it back together just so you know that they opened it. You had to be careful what you said. So most people, there's very little communication with Cuba. It isn't like now where there's constant communication. And so Cuba was this, in the book I call it, the planet Krypton, because in our minds, I mean, I knew Cuba was there, but it may as well have been 10,000 miles away, even though we were closer to Cuba and closer to the capital of Cuba than we were to Tallahassee, our own state capital. But it may as well have been in the South Pacific somewhere. It just wasn't a place people went. It wasn't a place people came from. It's a place where people had come from, and that was it.
Right.
And all of a sudden, I mean, I'd never had a conversation with someone my age in Spanish. We all spoke Spanish to our parents and stuff. And now I speak Spanish to my wife, but it was just this pattern. And I'm like, Cuba, you can like go there in these little boats, it's like, it's that close. And you knew it intellectually, but you didn't understand it. And then, fast forward years later, I'm doing all this research on Cuba. My wife's story had stayed with me. That experience had stayed with me. But it was a little bit outside of my very narrow expertise, which is that first wave that my family came on with the Bay of Pigs and Pedro Pan. All that happened during the first wave. And so, the people my family was connected to, my friends' parents, et cetera. And then I decided to do it. That was a long time ago. It was many years. And I got a contract to do it. It took me a long time, in part because it was just raising a family here, and there was a lot of demands, and writing the novel and all of that. But I finally, at long last, and with a lot of effort, finally, submitted it in the final version in 2018, right. And then 2019, the whole process of their editing, the publisher and the index and all of that stuff. And then it finally came out in the beginning of the fall of 2019.
And we're actually lucky because the Middlesex Moments news crew did speak to a couple of people that you're connected with about their experiences with the Marielle boat lifts. And why don't we take a quick look at what the students put together.
I was born and I was raised under the Castro regime. I guess if you're brought into that, you learn how to think that way. So you will never say anything to insult the government.
I lived in Havana, a section called Vedado, and I sort of realized of the systematic changes that were taking place within the society as well as the political shenanigans that were going on. And I said, it's really nothing I can do here. I mean, the enemy is just too big, and they're everywhere, and they're listening. And by that time, obviously, you saw a lot of the injustices.
And my aunt kind of talked to my brother and myself. She wanted to know, hush, hush. She was like, I just want to ask you a question. You can say no. I don't want your parents to know that I'm asking you this question. But would you like to go to the United States? And then at the same time, my mom is telling me, ooh, you have to think about this. You have to make sure that you want to leave because they might not let your dad out. And the last thing she said to us was, if he's not leaving, I'm not leaving.
In the flight, my brother is on the window, and I said to him, little did I know, very philosophical thought. Now I think. I said, look at it, enjoy it, and remember, because that's the last time you're ever going to see Cuba again.
I used to cry a lot. I used to have dreams at night that I wasn't going to see them, but my family was so comforting and so good to us that it made us feel good. I remember waking up when somebody told me, we're here, and I woke up and my aunt had just moved into a beautiful brand new neighborhood in Florida. I had never seen anything so nice. All the grass was cut, the houses were impeccable, clean, there was no dirt, there was no garbage, the streets were all paved, it was beautiful.
I'm so grateful for the American people they're the heart, and they open their arms, and they're unbelievable.
Thanks to our Middlesex Moments crew for putting that together. There's a couple people Victor knows, Victor's wife Amelia Triay, who was on the Marielle boat lift, survivor of that, and Mike Martinez, who was Operation Pedro Pan, who came over here. So real quick, in the short amount of time we have left, this book, The Marielle Boat Lift, The Cuban-American Experience, won a book award for nonfiction in the state of Florida for local work. And you accepted that award virtually, I understand?
No, not yet. It was the Florida Book Awards, and it won a gold medal in the Florida Book Awards. And it was supposed to have the ceremony in April. Or so. I can't remember because I had 3 trips to Florida planned during COVID. All 3 of them got canceled, and I forget which one was supposed to happen when, but it was in the spring. And apparently, the only mention I heard, the only potential plan that I heard was that they might do it next year, just give everybody their award next year. So, and I'm not sure. And then the other award, the other award I found out from the American Association of State and Local History, where it won an honorable mention. I didn't even know there was going to, I didn't know anything except when I saw it. I think they said, oh, our convention in Las Vegas was canceled. So I don't know if I was going to go or not, but I probably wouldn't have gone if it was all the way there. But we'll see. But I mean, the important thing is, the nice recognition and the book that was almost never written. That was probably the one that came closest to not being. Not because it wasn't going to get published, but because I just got too busy and things got crazy, and
Sure.
they were difficult years to write. You know, it wasn't like when I was in my 20s and 30s. So.
No, but again, nevertheless, you've had this amazing body of work of both fiction and nonfiction about the Cuban-American experience, and it's just so delightful that you're able to share that with the world, really, and to kind of tell the stories of people you know, people you love, and it's really important to really represent part of the fabric of the American experience as well.
Yeah, thank you.
So
thank you, and it's been great. You know, it's been a lot of work, but you know, it's nice riding up here because I go down, and I mean, I still consider myself as from Miami, even though I've lived here for 30 years, but you have to get away from it. You know, you have to fill up and immerse yourself, and then you know, detach yourself, and then you see it more clearly, because when you're in the middle of something, it's harder to see. So, and I know the middle, I go to the middle, and then I get that separation. And the college, I got to say, has always been extremely supportive of everything that I've done. Just like everybody's being extremely supportive with the COVID shutdown, and the fact that I'm teaching on campus, I can't tell you how much help I've gotten, and with the books, it's been the same. So I've always been very happy here.
Okay. Well, thank you again very much, Dr. Victor Triay, author and historian, professor of history here at Middlesex Community College, and so happy to have you here. And I know the students, you've touched thousands of students in your career here at Middlesex Community College, being the master storyteller that you are.
Thank you.
And I'd like to thank all of you at home, our listeners and viewers for Middlesex Moments, for joining us another edition of our program. As always, you're welcome to visit us in person. Remember your face mask, and remember to stay socially distant. At our main campus at 100 Training Hill Road in Middletown. You can also visit our Meriden Center, which is at Platt High School, 220 Coe Avenue, where we offer afternoon and evening classes 4 days a week. And certainly you can visit us 24/7, no face mask necessary, if you're online, at mxcc.edu. For everyone at Middlesex Community College, I'm Steve Winkler, and we hope to see you again soon.